The headlights caught it first. A small shape beneath the street lamp, barely visible against the snow. He almost kept driving. It was late, the kind of February night where the cold doesn't just bite, it punishes. The windshield wipers scraped ice with every pass, and all he wanted was to get home, peel off his work boots and forget the double shift. But something made him slow down. At first he thought it was a bundle of discarded fabric, maybe a lost glove. Then he saw the ears, small, pointed, tufted at the tips, and his breath caught. He pulled over, tires crunching through frozen slush, and stepped into the wind. The cold hit him like a wall. He pulled his collar up and moved toward the street lamp, boots breaking through the crust of ice with every step. It wasn't a kitten. The markings gave it away. Spotted fur, russet and gray, with dark rosettes along the legs, wide-set eyes still closed, paws too large for the body, and those ears unmistakable tufts that no house cat ever had. A bobcat, a kitten, no more than a few weeks old, lying motionless in the snow beneath the pale yellow glow of the lamp. He crouched low, his knees pressing into the frozen ground. The kitten didn't move. Its chest barely rose, frost clung to its whiskers, and its small body had gone stiff against the pavement. He reached out slowly, half expecting it to startle or cry out, but there was nothing. No hiss, no struggle, just the faintest flutter of breath, so fragile it might have been the wind. He didn't hesitate. Peeling off his coat, he wrapped the kitten inside, pressing it against his chest where his body heat still lingered. The fur felt like ice beneath his fingers. He turned and ran back to his truck, slipping once on the ice but catching himself before he fell. The engine was still running. He cranked the heat to full blast, and held the bundle close to the vents, feeling for a heartbeat he wasn't sure was still there. It was, faint, stuttering, but there. He drove home through the wind, one hand on the wheel, the other cradling the coat against his ribs. The roads were empty, the streetlights blurred past, and in the silence of the cab, he whispered to the small frozen life in his arms, words he didn't plan, promises he didn't mean to make. Just hold on, just a little longer. The house was dark when he arrived. He kicked the door shut behind him and moved straight to the living room, laying the kitten down on the coffee table with trembling hands. He worked fast. Heating pads from the linen closet, towels from the dryer still warm from the last load. He wrapped the pads in the towels, creating a nest of gentle warmth, and placed the kitten in the center. Its fur was still damp, matted with ice and snow. He filled a shallow dish with warm water, tested it with his wrist the way you would for a baby, and soaked a clean cloth. Gently, carefully, he began to thaw the kitten's frozen paws, wiping away the frost that had crystallized along its legs and belly. The kitten didn't stir. Its eyes stayed shut, but slowly, so slowly it almost hurt to watch, its breathing deepened. He sat back on the floor, his shirt still damp from the snow, and stared at the tiny creature in front of him. He told himself it was temporary. One night, maybe two, if it made it through. By morning he'd call a wildlife center. Someone trained, someone who knew what they were doing, someone who could give this wild thing the life it was meant to have. Just one night, he said aloud, as if saying it would make it true. That's all. Then someone else takes over. But even as he spoke he couldn't look away. He stayed there on the floor, adjusting the towels, checking the kitten's breathing, touching its small chest just to feel the rise and fall. The hours stretched. The house settled, and he didn't sleep. It was past midnight when he heard the soft creak of the hallway floorboards. He looked up. Milo stood at the edge of the living room, his orange tabby frame silhouetted against the dim glow of the kitchen light. The cat's ears were forward, alert but not alarmed. His tail hung low, swaying slightly, as he processed the unfamiliar scent that now filled the room. The man watched, waiting. He'd had Milo for 6 years. He knew his moods, his habits, the way he reacted to change. Milo hated the vacuum cleaner. He hissed at the neighbor's dog through the window. Once he'd cornered a mouse in the garage and refused to go near that corner for weeks afterward. This should have terrified him. But Milo didn't hiss. He didn't puff up or retreat. He padded forward slowly, his nose twitching, his green eyes fixed on the small bundle of fur in the center of the towels. He circled once, sniffing the air, his whiskers trembling as he studied the bobcat kitten. Then he sat, just sat, a few inches away, his posture calm, almost curious. The man held his breath. Milo leaned in. His pink tongue touched the bobcat's ear, still crusted with frost, and he began to groom, slowly, methodically, the same way he cleaned himself every morning on the windowsill. The bobcat didn't react. It couldn't, but Milo didn't stop. He licked the kitten's face, its matted fur, the delicate curve of its skull, working with a patience and precision that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The man sat frozen, unable to speak, unable to move. Milo settled beside the kitten, curling his body around it, his warmth replacing the heating pads. He tucked his chin over the bobcat's head and closed his eyes, his purr low and steady, vibrating through the silence. The man stared at them, domestic and wild, predator and prey, curled together like they'd always belonged to each other. And one question burned in his mind, a question that would follow him through every day that came after. Why would a domestic cat instantly adopt a wild predator that should have terrified him? Morning light crept through the blinds, pale and cold. The man woke on the couch, his neck stiff from sleeping at an angle, and reached for the coffee table before his eyes fully opened. His hand found warmth, fur, two bodies pressed together in the nest of towels. Milo had never left. The orange tabby lay curled tightly around the bobcat kitten, his chin resting on its back, his body heat wrapping it like a living blanket. The bobcat's breathing had steadied overnight. Its chest rose and fell in a slow, even rhythm, and for the first time since he'd found it beneath that street lamp, its tiny paws twitched, reaching, stretching, testing the world it had almost left behind. The man sat up slowly, not wanting to disturb them, but Milo's eyes opened anyway, green and calm, blinking once in acknowledgement before returning his attention to the kitten. He licked its ear. The bobcat stirred, a small sound escaping its throat, not quite a mew, something rougher, wilder. Milo answered with a soft chirp, and began grooming again. Something had shifted. The man felt it in the air, in the way Milo refused to leave the kitten's side even when food was poured into his bowl across the room. He felt it in the way the bobcat, still weak and unsteady, leaned into Milo's warmth instead of pulling away. This wasn't supposed to happen. Over the next days, the bond deepened in ways the man couldn't predict or control. Milo brought toys to the bobcat's bed, a crinkled ball, a catnip mouse, dropping them beside the kitten's nose and meowing until it responded. When the bobcat cried, weak and confused, Milo was there instantly, grooming, nuzzling, purring low and constant like a heartbeat. The man tried to separate them once, lifting Milo and placing him in the hallway, closing the door gently. It lasted 3 minutes. Milo yowled, scratched at the wood, his cries sharp and insistent. The man opened the door. Milo bolted straight back to the bobcat and wrapped himself around it, glaring at the man as if betrayed. He didn't try again. The bobcat grew stronger. It began eating solid food, small pieces of chicken the man warmed and placed on a dish. Its legs steadied, it teething on furniture legs, pouncing at shadows, climbing the back of the couch with surprising precision. Milo taught it house cat manners, the slow blink greeting, the gentle head bump, the way to ask for attention without demanding it. But the wildness was there too, in the focus of its eyes, in the way it stalked a dust mote like prey, in the power already building in its hind legs. The man watched them play one evening, Milo batting at the bobcat's paws, the bobcat responding with a strength that made Milo tumble backward, and Milo just purred, rolling back to his feet, ready for more. The man leaned against the doorway, his phone in his hand, the wildlife center's number still unsaved. He told himself, just a few more days. But he was beginning to realize this wasn't temporary anymore. Something unusual, something beautiful was unfolding in his living room, and he didn't know how to let it go. The change happened faster than he expected. Within weeks, the bobcat's paws had doubled in size, its legs lengthening into lean, powerful limbs built for something his living room could never contain. The play fighting with Milo grew more intense, tackles that sent both of them rolling across the floor, pounces that landed with real weight, jaws that closed around Milo's neck in mock hunts that looked less like games every day. But Milo never flinched, never hissed, never stopped trusting. The man watched them wrestle near the couch one afternoon, the bobcat pinning Milo to the carpet with both front paws, teeth bared in a silent snarl. Milo just purred, batting at the bobcat's face with a gentleness that seemed absurd given the power now coiled in the wildcat's muscles. When the bobcat released him, Milo groomed its ears like nothing had happened. The man made the call that evening. The voice on the other end of the line was calm, professional. The woman from the wildlife center asked questions: age, weight, behavior, diet. He answered them all, his eyes drifting to the hallway where the bobcat stalked a shadow along the baseboard, muscles rippling beneath its spotted coat. "He's healthy," she said, "strong enough to begin transitioning back to the wild. We can help with that process." The words should have been a relief. They weren't. He thanked her, hung up, and sat in the silence of his kitchen. Milo appeared in the doorway, meowing softly, looking for the bobcat. When he found it in the hallway, he chirped and head-bumped its shoulder. The bobcat responded with a low rumble, not quite a purr, something deeper, and pressed its forehead against Milo's. The man's chest tightened. Letting go meant breaking the bond Milo had formed. A bond Milo seemed to depend on, emotionally, in ways the man didn't fully understand but couldn't deny. He built the enclosure in the backyard, larger, taller, with platforms for climbing and hiding spots that mimicked the wild. The bobcat explored it fearlessly, stalking insects through the grass, leaping to high perches, scanning the air with its nose like it was remembering something it had never been taught. But every evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, the bobcat pressed against the glass door, staring inside, waiting. Its eyes found Milo on the other side, and the two of them sat there, separated by a barrier neither understood, touching noses through the glass. The man stood at the window, watching them, his phone still heavy in his pocket with the wildlife center's number saved. The question circled in his mind, relentless and unanswerable: is returning him to the wild the right thing, even if it breaks both their hearts? The stronger the bobcat became, the harder the decision felt. And spring was coming. Spring arrived with the smell of thawed earth and new growth. The bobcat stood at the edge of the enclosure, muscles coiled, coat thick and healthy, eyes sharp with an awareness that hadn't been there months before. He was no longer the frozen kitten from the street lamp. He was powerful, confident, undeniably wild. The man opened the gate one final morning, the wildlife staff standing at a distance with their clipboards and cameras, ready to monitor the release. Milo sat on the porch, tail wrapped around his paws, watching in silence. The bobcat stepped forward, paused at the threshold, and turned back. He looked at the man first, a long, steady gaze that felt like acknowledgement. Then his eyes found Milo. The two stared at each other across the yard. Milo's ears twitched. The bobcat's tail flicked once. Then, without ceremony, the bobcat turned and walked into the open forest. The man didn't move. Milo didn't follow. They just watched as the spotted coat disappeared into the undergrowth, swallowed by shadows and leaves, until there was nothing left but the sound of birds and wind. The house felt wrong after that. Milo wandered the rooms, crying softly, a sound the man had never heard from him before. He checked the enclosure door. He sat by the glass, staring into the empty yard. At night, he slept in the spot where the bobcat used to curl beside him, his body pressed against the ghost of warmth that was no longer there. The man wondered if he'd made a mistake, if love should have mattered more than instinct, if keeping them together would have been kinder than this quiet, aching separation. 3 weeks passed before he checked the trail camera. He scrolled through the footage absently. Deer, a raccoon, the usual nocturnal visitors. Then he stopped, his breath caught. There, at the edge of the tree line, stood the bobcat, bigger now, healthier than he'd ever been, watching the house with the same steady gaze he'd given the day he left. The man turned up the volume. Faint audio crackled through the speaker. Milo's cries from the porch, soft and searching, and then, too low, answering calls from the darkness, rough, deliberate. The bobcat had heard him. The next evening, the man opened the door. The bobcat stood at the edge of the yard, just beyond the reach of the porch light. He didn't approach fully, didn't step into the domesticated world he'd left behind, but he came close enough. Milo walked to the threshold, slow and careful. The bobcat lowered his head. Their noses touched, just for a moment, a greeting, a memory, a promise that neither had forgotten. Then the bobcat turned and slipped back into the trees. Milo sat on the porch, purring. The man closed the door gently and whispered into the quiet. He stayed only one night, but he left a bond that lasted a lifetime.